Chaim Bays, Volume 1, Middle of Discourse 39, Chapter 156, the bottom of page 307. So, the last few chapters, especially this minor, Rebbe Rashab, is explaining that the Tikkun Zeir, according to the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe, time there's a page called 20. Iyu b'chayu echad, Iyu b'gamu echad. And clearly from the Tikkun Zeir, we're talking about two tracks. He and his energies, according to Alter Rebbe, Chayu, his energies are one. He and his garmui and containers are one. The big question that Yosef Kodesh asks is, how can you say he and the containers of the energies are just a reflection and expression of the divine? Containers are already structured. And the answer is because the containers is, he says, to one, Yodam Vahen Vayodan Livrei Yeshmai. The instruments, because through them, in them and through them, he uses them to create. So basically, the tools God created to create are one with the one who created the tools. Basically. So there's two different purposes. The purpose is expression of the divine, reflection of that source, of the source. With Gamui, the purpose is in order to create, you need instruments. Again, not for God, he doesn't need the instruments. For us to have a relationship that makes sense the way God wanted this world to make sense. So it doesn't just a jump, God suddenly something popped out of nowhere. There's actual containers, chesed and gvura and tiferes, which give shape to existence as we know it. So his purpose is creation. But that too is one with the source. I explained it in two ways. Well, the Yosef Kodesh says it one way, but there's two ways how you attach evil. So basically, you're talking about two dimensions of evil. The first interpretation is Iyu b'chayu chayu b'gamu. Iyu is the Kecha Einsef, Kecha Blikvul, which is the root for all reflection and expression from the divine. Even Eir HaGvul, also rooted in Eir. As he said, because the infinite possibilities that are encompassed in this energy, this light, includes this one possibility that God will envision. Shir Atzmei B'Keach, he envisions and allocates one particular possibility, but it's still all an expression of the divine. Well, why will he allocate it, we learned earlier, is because he wants creation. But it's still an energy level. It's not on a kelim level. It's not instruments yet. It's the concept of chesed and gvura and so on. And that's Iyu, the Keach HaBlikvul, is Mesachid in Chayui with all the energies, including Eir HaGvul, all the energies. Chayui goes on all levels of Eir. Iyu now is talking about the Keach HaGvul Shabbat, second track. That just like he has the power of Blikvul, God has the power of Gvul. We're not talking about Eir HaGvul. We're not talking about within all the infinite possibilities another form of expression. We're talking about instrument, the power to create a yesh, the nifrit, as the Keach HaGvul. This cannot come from Eir, because Eir itself is connected and always attached to the revealing of its source. How could it create something that conceals its source, that feels that it's independent? Eir is an entity that never feels independence. I mean, sometimes it doesn't use it here, but just to make it a little more palatable. I don't want to compare it, but it doesn't bring it here. Just as an example, there is fish in the sea and creatures on land. Fish are always aware of their source. They're submerged in it. So to create a yesh v'nifrit, which is the purpose of creation, in order to have transformation, or to have sapcher chashech le'era, something that has an independence, that senses its own self, has to come from a different track. That's called the Keach HaGvul Shabbat. And that too is Mesiachid, is one. Iyu v'gamui is one, with the gamui is called the skeleton, the structure, the bones, in order to. Now in this process you also no, it's not a the Iyu is also not like this Iyu is Keach HaGvul Shabbat. There's a second interpretation. That's interpretation one. It's not the Yosef Kodesh actually. This is the interpretation of the Rebbe Rashab. The Alter Rebbe explains it elsewhere. We'll get to that in a minute. Just to add one more point, which is relevant here, that so bottom line is the first you can call these two tracks actually. One is called Keich HaGili, one called Keich HaHelam. Different way of putting it. Because we took Keich HaGvul, the whole purpose of it is Helam. When I say Helam, not Helam as we usually refer to as a negative thing. Helam as concealing the source so an independent Yesh can emerge. In that sense. So it's fundamentally driven by non-concealment. Yet at the same time, the Rebbe Rashab qualifies and explains that Gamui, Yiv Gamui Chad reveals things that Yiv Chayu does not reveal. But only after have Yiv Chayu, because on its own there's no revelation. On its own, the instruments or the kalim or the structure of existence is exactly that. But once you have the Eir HaBligvul, as he explained, and you combine it with the with the Keich HaGvul, then there's a distinction. He says the Eir HaBligvul will only reveal Metzias Atzmus. Is the words. See the existence of the source. And a little also Keich Atzmus, the power of the source. But the true power of the source, on a deeper level, and it's called Eifana Atzmus. What Atzmus is like, you learn more from the Kalim and from Gamui than you do from Chayyur. So I know it sounds paradoxical initially, but if you think about it, it's not. Because the Eir can only reveal that God is a source of light. It doesn't reveal to you the things that God is beyond light. In other words, to say that Atzmus is bound to be a source of luminary? No. He's also luminary. When God does something that is not consistent, or not consistent, I'm saying that's different than himself, that reveals that he has far more than just revelation. But on the other hand, the Keich HaGvul on its own, without Keich HaBligvul, without Keich HaGili, you don't know it. So in a way, a stone in this world, a real physical stone, teaches you more about Atzmus than the highest levels of Eir itself. But it can't teach it to you because there's no awareness until you have those higher levels of Eir itself, because they're the revelatory force. So think of it like this, like the Rebbe would often bring. What is light actually? Physical light. It doesn't create anything. A room could be completely dark, full of objects. The only thing that light does is allows you to see the objects. Put on the light, so you see there's a table, a chair, steps, and so on. Without that, you don't even know, and you could be hurt, or it's darkness. So the fact that there is the Gamui, there's the Kalim, there's existence, as we know, the Yesh of this world, without Eir HaBligvul, it would be like darkness. Be there. There's the power is there, but no one can see it. When you bring the light from Eir HaBligvul, that carries the Keich HaGvul into this world, and you obviously work on both tracks to combine them. That's where you can begin. They both complement each other. Like we sometimes learn that tshuva is higher than Torah. But that Torah, God forbid, if you're over, tshuva can repair. It's something that Torah forbade. That's why it says, Abraham asked Torah to create the world. He said, no, tshuva, yeah. On the other hand, who reveals to us the power of tshuva? How do you know how to do tshuva? And the power of tshuva is Torah. Because Torah is Torah Eir. Tshuva is not Eir. Tshuva is a way of going deeper into something and finding a deeper power. But on its own, it's not there until you reveal it. And it's just some examples. Same thing sometimes Torah mitzvahs is the same idea. The mitzvahs, as you said, mitzvahs is the actual manifestation of divine will, but it's in a physical object. Torah does not have, not talking about Sefer Torah, not talking about not talking about the mitzvah part of Torah, we're talking about the intellectual part of Torah, the learning of it. So bottom line is, that's interpretation one. Then, chapter 155, the last one we learned, it's in the Gersa Kedush, and here I think maybe I may have misspoken, or some people misunderstood. Someone asked me something, they read this chapter. He says, Iyu v'Gamui, according to the interpretation one, Iyu is Keich HaGvul. And Iyu v'Chayu is Keich HaBligvul. He says in the Gersa Kedush, she says Iyu is not Keich HaGvul, but Iyu is the Eirus that go into the containers. I think I may have said, I don't remember if I did, I'm correcting myself. Maybe I wasn't clear. I said I think that Gamui means not the containers, but it means the air inside the containers. Not correct if that's what was said.
That's what he said.
Okay. But Iyu means, here, Iyu is not Keich HaGvul, but Iyu is the Eirus that go into the containers. That's what it says in the Gersa Kedush. So it's a second interpretation of Iyu v'Gamui. The first one is Keich HaGvul, the power of God to create Gvul, to create Yesh, to create something that is defined, confined, limited, independent, however you determine it. Here is teaching Iyu is going on the areas that go inside the Kelim.
In which
Yeah, Iyu v'Gamay, yeah. Iyu v'Chayei is always, Iyu is either Er HaBlikvul, I think in both, it's always Er HaBlikvul, or you'd say it's Er in general. Iyu is the Sheresh Keich HaBlikvul, and Chayu is the Er, all levels of Er, including Er HaGvul.
So there's either one of these fetches why Iyu is repeated.
But only in the second, only in Iyu v'Gamay Chad you have
So
two.
either one fetches out why Iyu is repeated, why doesn't say just Iyu.
That's the reason.
Because there are two different Iyus.
There's two tracks. Well, two dimensions of, when you say He, and there's one, you have to, here you talk about He, God, as power of Likvul, and here is Iyu as power of Gvul. He says that clearly, it's very clear. That's why it says twice. Because it should have said Iyu v'Chayu v'Gamay Chad. Or even if he wants to, he could have said Iyu v'Chayu Chad v'Gamay Chad. He says Iyu v'Chayu Chad, Iyu v'Gamay Chad. That clearly tells you there's two tracks. No, we're not splitting God into two, obviously. It's two powers of the divine. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. No, but I'm saying the second interpretation now. No, but I think I said it on the Gamui. The Gamui means not kid. Listen, let me correct it now. Whatever it is, okay. What it is the following. Iyu v'Gamui Chad here in this interpretation, according to the Kedesh, Iyu is the energies that go in the container are one with the containers. So the Chayr is a little different than the previous interpretation. So he qualifies it immediately, no. But it's still all about Esabas. It's still all about creation. The difference is, are you talking about the power to create? Or are you talking about the energy as it's actually activating the containers in creation?
He said, in these words, it's both things right over here. He says both. Uveha'ar, it's...
No, but it says clearly. If you look right in the beginning, he says, the guess a Kedesh move on begins Iyu shemesachid in Gaboy that begins Erfim yamesachid in Makel.
Right, I know. I'm saying, look at the end of chapter 155. He says,
Iyu,
the last 7 lines. Iyu amesachid in Gaboy zeb begins koychak pol shvein saif. And then the next line he says, Ubeha'ar gufa.
Yeah, that's the two interpretations right there. Exactly. Yeah. That's correct. But I'm spelling out in the Maimer, he's talking to interpretations. The Chilchesed wills, and then over Gufa, Chins Iu, Chins Essential, and Chins Asmus, right? But regardless, even according to this interpretation of the Gersa Kedesh, you're still talking about an energy that is relating to creation, the instruments. So what would be the difference between Keich HaGvul and Keich that's in the Kedesh? Okay, simple. I use the example of an artist because I think it's a good example to help understand it. So think of it like this. When an artist wants to create a piece of art, a lot of things are necessary here. Obviously you have the artist himself. So I'll spell out all the levels. Then you have that he's a power, he's not just a human being. He has the power to create art. He's an artist. Now he has infinite possibilities. Create many different types of art. He chooses to create one piece of art, or a particular image, particular expression. Okay, good. Now that's still not enough. He needs instruments. He needs a canvas, and a palette, and a brush. Whatever is necessary to express this piece of art. He could have it perfectly figured out in his mind. But all it is a theory, it's a concept. Okay. So the difference is, the mushal now, the nimshal, is that God actually creates the instrument. An artist buys the instruments, doesn't create them. Even if he shapes them, he's also shaping them from something. But here, you're talking about someone that is God, that's creating them all. But he's creating it in a way, remember, we always talk about retracing the steps. You can say, what does God need all this? Let him just create and do it, that's it, and goodbye. Well, God does that, we will never have a relationship with him. We have no way to access it. So he does it in an organized way. We are his art, actually. Tzelem Elikim. We're created in God's shape and image. So is the universe. It's not called Tzelem Elikim, but it's still God's paint, God's images, so to speak. And I'm not here to get into the difference between the human being and the rest of existence, because the rest of existence is also obviously reflective of God's plan. Briefly, the human being obviously encompasses it all, and is far more reflective of the divine itself. The rest of the world is just simply it's like the difference between the objects in the picture or the whole picture. But bottom line is that here the only difference in the Mashal and Nimshal is that the instruments are also divinely created and divine instruments. So how does it work? So here we have it. God is the artist, not bound being an artist, but he's also an artist. He chose to be an artist. The power of the infinite possibilities of art is Eir HaBlikbul, the ability to express infinite ways. Shirat V'B'Koyach, Eir HaGvul, is the one envisioning, he wants the universe the way it is today. Devim Tzemei Chaim Medaber, human beings, the 10 spheres, etc., etc. But for God, obviously, Ein Koyach Hasapel, as soon as he wants that, it can be co-created. But he wants it in a way that we can hold on to it. So what happens is, as a result of this plan, he actually also has another track where he creates the instruments. Here are the kelim. The kelim are the instruments. So the kelim are the paintbrush or whatever else it's called, the brush, that may be enough. You can say the colors. I don't want to get into that's really technicalities, but bottom line, it's not the image in his mind of the picture. It's how it's the tools. And the kelim. So Iyu v'chayu echad would mean that the artist is one, Iyu. That the Koyach HaBlikbul, his envisioning, is one with the energies that come from him, that are expressed. Iyu v'gamoy echad, the two interpretations would go like this. The Koyach HaGvul, his ability to create those two instruments, is one with the instruments in the process of creation. They're an extension, in other words, they're able to convey and express his will to create, not his will to express. That's the Eir. This is Kelim, the will to create. And according to the second interpretation, you'd say that Eirus in the Kelim would be when the artist is actually using the brush. So the brush is a container, but he still needs to touch the brush, and without touching it, it's not going to happen. Remember we said about Maisa, there's two things. That Maisa, there's a Koyach HaMaisa, has the element that when you throw a stone, if you are not touching the stone will never be thrown. On the other hand, when do you really see the stone, the pu'ula? Only once you release it. So he uses this example as two steps in Maisa. So that Maisa is different. It's something separate from you. Let's say he talks about the potter, but doesn't say a potter. He says a umam, a craftsman that builds something needs two things. First, he has to be touching it and shaping it. It's not happening automatically. While he's touching and shaping it, paradoxically, you don't see yet the real Keli. When he lets go, there's a vessel that's there. In its full glory. So the same thing as in creation, it says that God threw, it's like throwing, he threw pebbles and created earth. So the same thing is here. The Koyach HaGvul is the power to do so. That's one with the instruments. The second element is the Eirus in the Kelim themselves. There's Eirus that are energizing those containers. In other words, when the brush is actually being used. Not the creation of the brush. The brush is being used to actually color or shape. There's an energy in it. There's the hand of the artist. It's not just the brush is automatically doing so. So that is one with the brush as well. That's all in Atzilus, by the way. All this is critical. It's not in Atzilus. In Biyah, you no longer say he and his Eirus and Kelim are one. Because here it's already the stone has been thrown.
Right.
We're talking here the process that will lead to creation. Once there's a creation, once we exist and breathe Tziyah, now we're already a stone that can say, hey, no one threw me, I'm on my own. I'm flying on my own. Or, the sun rises, it's all on our own. Because that's the power of Koyach HaGvul, to conceal the source. So we're like a stone in midair, convincing ourselves, or able to convince ourselves that we're on our own. We fly, we have our own powers to fly.
But the truth is that the Eibush is still holding it. He never separates, just like your marshal with the craftsman. He when he's holding it, he has to let go for you to really see the artwork. Eibush is always, even in
that's what it says. But you're getting into a little complicated because there's free will. You can ask the question about free will, of course. You can ask about free will. Secondly, it's not an illusion. That's the key thing. It's not an illusion because he actually has the power. Because the mere fact that we can feel that is some reality. Because it's a Torah reality that we are separate. That's the point. That self is also a divine power. That's already from the mysteries. You could say By us human beings, it doesn't make sense. Either you're throwing the stone, either the stone is on its own, or you're separate. And when it's flying, your hand is not there. The power is there, but your hand is no longer there. With Elokus, it's not that way. You can do both. It's both elements at the same time. There's a truth to our feeling as well. That's why our Veda makes a difference. It's not an illusion. He spoke about that earlier. That's why there's Kalim. Why do you think God uses Kalim? If he didn't use Kalim, then he could create the illusion with Eir. There are actual Kalim that are one with him. So in other words, the instruments, the fact that there's an instrument that has a...
How could you make illusion with oil?
It's an illusion is an illusion. It's not real. We can make it just that's in our mind. The fact that there are actual Kalim that are one with the divine tells you that he's giving structure real value. That's the point. That's not just another form of Eir that's concealed. Because you could say it's just Eir that's concealed. Why do you have to say it's Kalim? Because Kalim tells you that the structure is part. Remember, God is not limited by being Ayin. He's as close to Ayin as he is to Yesh. He's as close to Eir as he is to Kalim. So the idea of creating a structure, a real structure that has a sense of independence, is also in the power of Ein Sof. That's why it teaches us about Atzmus things. If it was an illusion, also wouldn't teach us anything. It would say, God's able to conceal. He's a magician. The fact that he can create a Yesh, that's the whole Igeres HaKodesh, that actually feels and acts independent and can actually cause damage as a result. The Alter Rebbe is Mechadish, that itself comes from Yesh Amiti, Atzmus who has no cause. That's why he can create us to feel like we have no cause and we actually act on it.
But if that's
So the illusion part of it is, the non-true part of it is that's not true. We are truly come from a cause, but we actually live our lives as if we're not, and that itself has a reality.
So if it has a reality, when we say that Tzimtzum Pshuto, there is a reality to that too, that God draws us up.
That's a good question, but then you're going too far. Remember, there's a very thin line of how far you can go. Tzimtzum Pshuto, as the Rebbe explained, was possible, could have been that way, but it could have been that way. But first of all, Alter Rebbe was Mekabel. That wasn't that way. That's number one. But it could have, yeah. If it would have been that way, there would have been ultimately a disconnect between us and God. The only way you would connect, you'd have to annihilate yourself. That's the problem with Tzimtzum Pshuto. Because there's too much disconnect. See, without Tzimtzum Pshuto, you have it like this. You do have containers. You do have concealment. You don't have the etzem is not there. The etzem is there, number one. And even the Giluim are also there, but they're concealed. So it's a far more complicated, but it is a combination of a reality that exists.
It's not the reality.
It is. Reishis Bodol Lakim is a reality. When you do a mitzvah, it's reality. There's no way around that.
This is a contradiction.
It's not a
You say we
contradiction.
don't understand it, but it is.
I don't see it that way.
If God is a soul, how could be some other
Who says God is Ein Sof? Where would you get that conclusion from?
No, if you want to say there is another existence, you are limiting.
No, that's your logical understanding of God. Because you're applying your principles that either you're holding on or you're not holding on. So you're applying your own way of thinking to God. Just don't apply that, and you won't have a problem. And second of all, who said contradictions are a problem? It's only a human problem, contradiction.
Okay.
It's a logical issue.
It makes more sense.
No, but what's second? I understand. We live all day with contradictions, and we don't have a problem with that. Do you have any contradictions in your life? Huh? So why suddenly is there a problem? I don't understand. People suddenly have a problem with contradiction. That's when it's a contradiction, like the worst possible thing that exists. Life is contradiction. Contradiction is not a problem. It's only if you're a mathematician. 2 + 2 is either 4 or 5. In that world, it's a problem.
So it is the line, what he said. Then Tzimtzum Pshuto.
Is there, one second. You all have children. Do you remember when your children were born? Yeah. You remember when they couldn't even speak? Right? Today, not only they speak back. And they can be even more intelligent than you. They can become big scholars. So tell me, is this a contradiction? Here's a little kid. Just 20, 30 years later, he's a whole Yatsubidan.
This is Christianity, what they said.
Christianity.
You say that. You say that.
You have a kid in
It
the
is,
book.
and then there is, as a result of that, could be another God also.
What do you
That's how I understood it. Because
Let him finish. He's saying it's about.
So it's a simple example. So here you have a person.
Example.
that began, if you saw a little baby, you'd never believe this baby could one day be. Let's say you never saw a child grow up. You saw a baby. You think this baby, you know what? Okay, maybe it'll grow a little older, but you know, you never imagine that this person can be a whole entity. Correct? And yet it does become. Why? Because his kalim can expand using Lashon Chassidus. As they expand, more potential comes out of the soul. You suddenly realize the soul has unbelievable stuff. This is just a simple human being. This is a contradiction. That a mind that once couldn't understand anything is now understanding the deepest ideas. So, I mean, life is full of these type of so-called, you can call that a contradiction, and it's not. Well, so the same thing as ourselves. We have the ability, as human beings, God created us, we start as limited structures, and we slowly expand those structures. As we learn and expand our containers, we can receive more air until we can connect to the highest levels of godliness. So that's what Tzimtzum would create a wall, a ceiling, where you couldn't go further. Because God is there and we're here. So this is a whole. Anyway, I don't want to go into Tzimtzum because it wasn't even mentioned in this matter. Since you mentioned it, I gave a short answer. But the bottom line is that it's not an illusion. Existence is real. Our sense of independence is real. And it's possible because God himself is so-called independent and has no cause. That's what he says. So he is one with his energies, is one with his containers. Here he's talking about either Keichad Vul or the air that connects. And in that sense, it's like he said, it's shaped by the containers affect the air, they affect the energy. Like the neshama, like the body affects the neshama. We're able to see physical things and so on. As a result, it's a different dimension than air. It's already now an energy that is manifest in the instruments, creating, and that too is one. The instruments are one with that energy.
So when you say he's one with his containers, it's basically the mushal the stone. He's one with that stone. So he's just concealed, but it's saying clearly there's one with that.
Not just stone, the koyach.
I can never let go of it. That's how we're going to make it. He's one of his containers. In a sense.
No, the throwing stone is biyah, it's not Atzilus. In Atzilus, we're still talking Asiya that is still holding on to the stone. We're talking Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, before the stone has been thrown.
Right, but he's telling us that he's one with his
No, once in biyah, he's not one. Once there is a reality like ours, we don't anymore say Iyu v'gamu echad. Yeah, you still say what he says in Shayach V'amunah, that God can sustain the universe every second. But that's a whole other story. Then he can sustain it in a concealed way, but you no longer say. He says that clearly. He says, the whole point at the bottom of page 306, where he says, that's why Atzilus is called Asiya. So he says, Asiya, there's two things. It's Chabus HaMakeach HaBel K'mei Woman, right? He says, that's like Malchus in Atzilus. And the second, as it separates, and then the stone flies. He says, that's how Malchus enters into Biyah. See? Iyu v'chayuch, Iyu v'gamu echad is only the first step, not the second one. Nasa b'chinas nibna, look at line 4. Comes nibna. V'keil necessary b'chaz b'chinas chutzenis hakel. Zeh na yichud Iyu v'gamu hu b'shvil hisav, zeh shakel yastiv ya'al ma'eh, this is how it's as soon as we say there's a yichud, there's a unity, you're talking about that there is a connection.
The stone feels the source.
One is from up down and one from down
Oh,
up.
Essentially, yeah.
There's a unity. Yeah. So we're saying there's no unity, meaning that it doesn't feel the source, but there's still unity, it just doesn't feel the source.
Yeah, looking up. And minds are looking down.
Yeah, this is a lot of questions.
One's Matza L'Maila, one's Maila L'Mata.
What answer?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. They're both matter.
Looking up at.
No, I don't know what you mean.
You said the other
In
day.
Atzilus, everything is united. That's the whole point. The Tikkun Azeh is saying that Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, in Atzilus, both the energies and the containers are one with him. The relation here is what levels exactly are we talking about? What does the Iyu mean? What does the
United
Chad?
like a fish in water. It's united that it feels the source, it's united.
Remember, don't think of Atzilus as some type of other world. It's another dimension of reality. Whatever this reality is, in Atzilus, in its source, that reality is completely connected. The is part of God's power. That's what it knows. It's not revealed power, but it is part of God's power. There's nothing else to talk about. So we're talking now in Ishtalshus, it's a matter of levels of how it finally becomes a separate. Like in this world, we don't have Yuv Chayu Echad, Yuv Echad. The purpose when the Mashiach comes is that we should be Mamshech Atzilus in this world. But in this world, there's no Yuv Chayu Echad, Yuv Echad at all. It's not that when you say the world of Atzilus, you mean that dimension. Our existence is still all a reflection of, like, think of the artist standing there with the instruments. Everything is united. Everything is perfect. Then, say, take the next step, would be the artist suddenly conceals his presence. And all you're left with is a piece of art. You see some instruments. That's that. Now you're on your own. What do you think? So you could say, the artist is just there. I don't see him. Or you could say, hey, there's no one around. I'm on my own. I do whatever I want. And that's that. That's biyah. That's the consciousness. What I just described as the biyah consciousness. Atzilus consciousness is everything is there. The art is there. The artist, and the instruments, everything, and it's full awareness and cognizance of an artist in the room. That's Atzilus. It's two consciousness levels. That's essentially what it is. But they're fundamentally different, obviously. If Atzilus would just remain, and there wouldn't be a next level of parsa and concealment, that's it. We'd have a perfect world. The world would be completely aware of its source. There'd be trees and everything that you see. But there'd be no independence. Now, take away Atzilus, why can't you just jump from Atzmus to Biyah, let's say? Then you have a different problem. You'll have a power of God to create, but you'll never have the ability of an existence to reconnect to it. How will it reconnect? Because what it'll have is God put the world in there, and God has power. Like I said, a stone, like a dark room. You'll have a dark room. You'll have a dark universe. A universe full of beautiful stuff. But there will be no what's called human consciousness, human awareness. He said it clearly, Yedid, there will be no knowledge at all. He said it specifically, he said there would be not one drop of knowledge. It would be like a bunch of inanimate billions of stones on earth that do not have any awareness of anything. It's still God's creation, but no one would know about it. So you could say, who cares? Well, that's the whole purpose. God wants us to be in existence and become aware of Him. So you need to have both Gili and Hela. That's called being that's a Dira b'tachtenim. He wants a tachtenim. But He wants it to be a Dira. Which a Dira means that you should, in the Dira, the person living there is completely revealed. As it says. Right, so right there you have so-called the ultimate paradox. That's what He wants. That's in the Sabbath Kodesh Baruch. Doesn't want a revelation. Doesn't just want a revelation of Himself. So Atzilus becomes the key bridge because it is basically you could say it's like the instrument room, sort of whatever you want to call it. That's the room because that's where the instruments are. Remember, higher than Atzilus and lifting at Tzimtzum, you're talking about everything within the image of the artist. The artist's image is in his mind. You don't have anything. At Atzilus you have instruments. There's actual instruments. But there the instruments are one with either the source of what created the instrument or the energy that's energizing. And as soon as you take that, as soon as you conceal that, then you're left with so-called a clueless world, an agnostic world, if you want to put it that way. Now, it's true, even though it doesn't talk about it, the key element they added, which is not really in this Maimonides, is that it's not an illusion, but agnostic. Because you could say that the whole thing is just an illusion. It's a matter of us going over the illusion. Chassidus is very adamant in not accepting that possibility for many reasons, obviously. Because then we basically, for example, there's whole sickness from the Rebbe about this. If you want to read more about it, go to the chapter I have in my chapter in Torah Meaningful Life, Unity. There's a whole sichah from the Rebbe in the year Tovshin Chav Ches. The Rebbe spoke about this very strongly. In the G'shayich D'Amuna, the end of Perek Dalet, on the right side is brackets. The Alter Rebbe adds in the bracket that Tzimtzum Nikra Kelim. His words. Tzimtzum Nikra Kelim. The Rebbe has a whole long sichah. Unbelievable sichah. What does the Alter Rebbe add? Why do you have to say Tzimtzum Nikra Kelim? Why can't you just say Tzimtzum is just concealment? That's the difference between Tzimtzum Pshut and not ultimately. Tzimtzum Nikra Kelim means Tzimtzum have something positive about them. It's not just a concealment. And it's a very subtle line. The Rebbe's main chiddush was that you have to say that the concealment has a substance. Because if not, two things, they have some fundamental problems with the Torah mitzvahs. If not, you basically say that Torah mitzvahs don't really have any objective. They're only revealing something that was concealed. So for a tzaddik, for example, where the tzimtzum is not there, he's not achieving anything. The Mashiach would be no achievement. It's just revealing what was there already. You call tzimtzum l'kelim, you're saying that existence, the concealment of existence has substance. And no matter who you are, even a tzaddik has to deal with that substance, with that concealment. It's not just in other words, the absence of light. There's substance to this existence that is a yesh in our lives.
So,
And therefore, there's a real achievement when we do Torah mitzvahs. You're transforming containers. You're not just revealing something that was concealed.
Don't we always say darkness is just a lack of
No,
That's what Alter Rebbe says. Tzimtzum nikra kelim. That does not mean it's just absence. It means it's called kelim.
But we say that. Don't we generally say that? It's just
That's
kosher doesn't have any.
First
It's
of all,
Metzias on itself. It's just
First of all, it's not
lack of
correct.
light.
First of all, there are two opinions about the Rebbe brings the two levels of cheshire. It's not correct what you say.
Okay.
Sometimes it says the substance, sometimes it says lack
Oh,
of
really?
absence. That's clearly
Two levels of kosher.
It's number one.
Watch the video.
two perspectives.
It's two dimensions, two levels of the cheshire.
Why does the Alter Rebbe say, this is involved in the Maimar in Svartim, he speaks about this perception of Yesh Bifnei Atzma, he calls it Mechat Tois, and in many other Mamor, he calls it Sheker Gomer. How do you reconcile that?
Okay, that's what I was going to lead to. One second. There's another side to this, that sometimes you'll hear the expression that the tzimtzum is Hepech HaRatzon. It's against God's desire, the tzimtzum. According to what I just said, why is it against? It's part of the plan. And the way the Chassidus explains it is that tzimtzum is b'shvil ha'gilui. Because to say that the tzimtzum, the kelim, even tzimtzum, the nikra kelim, is an end in itself, God forbid. It's a means.
So that's the Mechat Tois.
So exactly. In other words, there's another dimension here that we have to consider. Because you see, this is the thin line.
I never tried about that.
The thin line is like this. If you completely eliminate the substance of existence and you say it's an illusion, and you have big problems with the whole accomplishment of Torah mitzvahs and Reishis Bar Elokim, are we really accomplishing something, or we're just going through motions? And what's Mashiach really mean? And Mashiach becomes, it's something really achieved. Or as the Rebbe puts it elsewhere, is it only for us or also for God? Because according to all this, you'd say it's only for us. God doesn't need. God's there, present. God's present no matter what. And the answer is no. Mashiach is not just for us, also for God. Shechinte b'Gildusa. Mashiach will come. It's not just that God is rewarding us and throwing us candies for what you did, but I prefer Galus because God doesn't care. Helam and Gili, what difference does it make? If Helam is a real thing, then God also doesn't want it. In other words, so that's number one. That's one point. On the other hand, you do have a whole part of reality that is called sheker. In other words, let's put it this way. The best example that Chassidus gives for this is a parent hides from his child in order to elicit the ingenuity of the child to find the parent. Okay? This is where the Rebbe cried when he said this. Okay, so the father hid so well, the child can't find him. It's really only meant the deeper he hides, the more ingenuity he wants. And then the child stops looking. The child says, you know what? My father's gone, disappeared, I have no father. And what does the child start doing? He does whatever he wants. As if there's no father. Now thinks his reality, this concealment, becomes his revelation. That's what you say.
Sheker Gomer.
Yeah. That. So now what happens is all problems begin. So the root of all evil, that's why evil doesn't come from above, is the concealment which was for a good purpose. That's why you can't say the concealment is a virtue. The concealment has a purpose. It's in order to bring a deeper revelation. But it's never a revelation itself. That's the point. So the kelim are necessary in order to create, because without that you're not going to have the purpose of existence, the yesh. But the goal was that we should never go too far, not to delude ourselves. You know what? There really is only concealment. And I'm off on my own, and now once you're on your own, we become destructive, and we hurt others. Look, here's a simple thing. According to the Yerushalmi, it says that all Jews, all people for that matter, are one organism. Right? We're all parts of one body. Obviously, so it's inconceivable that a right hand should hit a left hand because it's misbehaved, unless there's something unhealthy. An immune system doesn't turn on itself unless it's a disease. And yet we see all the time, this is the root of all problems. Human injustice, human evil. How is it that we hurt each other? Even if you know it. The answer is because it's innocent, because God concealed the fact that we're part of one thing. Now why did He conceal it? Because He wanted us to be wise enough to understand it on our own and come to reconnect. This is the reason why God separated Adam and Chava. This is why God creates period in a world of atoms. Truth is, the world is one, but He created a real diversity that can lead to divisiveness, that can lead to war. Now, the purpose of it is good, but the thing itself isn't. That's the key thing you have to understand. So, if we misunderstand what happens, all destruction comes from it, and that's for sure evil and hepach haratzon, and as you said, sheker. So, in other words, what's sheker? Not that the father hid, and not that he wants his sons to do. Sheker is that the child convinced himself that in other words, the sheker is that you took seriously God hiding. You took it too seriously. Instead of realizing His purpose, it's basically misguided understanding of the concealment, if you want to put it that way. It's a misunderstanding, right? It's a misguided understanding. I mean, it's I know it's academic, which can lead, of course, to the worst. There'd be no Holocaust if that didn't happen. So we're not talking here a little matter here. We're talking about serious right? Yeah, the serious damage, but all because of the purpose. Now, another way to put it is like this. You all know it says Yom Echad, first 3 days of creation. Also compared to Chodesh Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan. What's that? So day 1, Vayarakim Tev. Day 2, it says doesn't say Kitayv. Day 3 it says double Kitayv. Why? Day 2 was not created by God. He also said He separated heaven and earth, but because separation can lead to machlekes, you can't call it revealed good. And day 3, when you see Shalom, that day 3 makes peace between day 1 and 2. Like, think of two ksuvim, so when they contradict each other, the purpose is to find a deeper truth. But until you don't find it, you can't call day 2 good. So this is the constant balance. And if you go a little too far this way, you get consumed by darkness. If you go a little too far the other way, you ignore the reality of existence. That's why it's not so simple. Is there contradiction? Yes, initially. But if you start thinking about it, you can see it's a brilliant, eloquent, in-between step.
And Yom Shishi, it's told Ma'od, right?
Yeah, and also double touch.
So Ma'od is infinite level, because in the 6th day of creation is when we find Geulah, that's when we bring Mashiach.
Right.
That concealment of that happened on
and also it's also Rosh Hashanah, it's the creation of the human being who brings it all together.
But it's the solution, it's the revelation of that concealment. That's why God says, "Oh, you found it."
Yeah, but that's the sapcha of the Malchus. Yeah, of course. The point is, it's a thin line, and I could go into a long elaboration, but if you want to go through philosophies, even non-Jewish philosophies compared to Jewish, and even within Jews itself, you'll see the difference. That the Rambam is always more logical than the Ramban, right? The Rambam says the ultimate sky is the Shabbos. Why? Because how could you say that a soul in a body is going to comprehend God as well as a soul without a body? Wouldn't that all be intuitive? But that nevertheless, the Kabbalah is possible like the Ramban, that the ultimate sky is in the body. So then we're left with the question. A soul inside a body is never as superior. But then that comes to Siddur, that's based on our Maimonidean look, where Ruchnis is superior to Gashmis. And God, in some ways, is more spiritual than He's material. But if you go to Atzmus, that wants to obtain it, Yesh Amiti, this is exactly the point. Iyu v'chayu echad is what the Rambam is saying. And the Iyu v'chayu echad reveals a level of Atzmus that the Chayu can never reveal. Like I said, the stone on this earth, the fact that there's a Yesh, reveals a level of Atzmus that earth can never reveal. And I'm not getting into the Rambam missed it, he didn't miss it. His kav, just like Shammai and Hillel, was to reveal that part, the power of Neshama. That was the Rambam's approach to everything. The Rambam. The Rambam is, we focus the mem, is strong. The first mem, Rambam. And the other one is the first letter is weak. Ramban.
Rambam,
The base ban. Right. Rambam, Ramban. Right. Ban and Ma. Ma,
in Lechavia,
Shamaguf.
When that makes sense, Ram means to be elevated. When Neshama, just said Neshama. Rambam, yeah, emphasize the Rambam. She
Okay, good,
just
fine.
the soul.
Yeah,
The
that's
Ramban is
Yeah.
Nefesh
Like it
Bahamas
says,
added to
It
the
says in
Ban.
Haggadah. By Manishtana, it says, Ka-
Right, so-
by the way.
Good. Nice. How you doing?
But at the end, it's just called by one little small thing. I don't want to throw any cold water on it.
Don't good?
No, it's fine, but it's also an acronym, so it's not.
but in Yerushalayim, they have
Moshe ben, Rav Moshe ben, Rav Moshe ben Nachman.
they have a strict Rambam, and then they don't want to make a Rambam because people will really get confused. So they make Shteirot ben Maimon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I will say other thing, however, we said by Manishtana, we said, Kan haben shoyel ma. Ban asks ma. That's what it says there. And it doesn't. Anyway, the point I'm making here is
It wasn't a
that
Kugel.
huh?
The Rambam wasn't a Kugel.
There's two opinions. No. Don't just say yes, not
No,
correct.
you said no.
The two opinions. The Rebbe brings two opinions. Some say he was not at all. Some say yes. Some say the Seif Yomov. At the end of his days, he was aware of it. That there's three opinions.
אז זה possible שרמב"ם זה שנתנו קבלה.
The Sikhs from the Rebbe it's not a Pella. It's like, when the Alshich, when the Arizal would teach, and the Alshich would fall asleep, or others would fall asleep, he said the Alshich was shaykh to Elam HaDrush. So when you speak the Sot, he fell asleep. It means his Primus Atena came through his niglet. It's a scholar, it's very vague faith. Not, that shouldn't be a Pella necessarily. He may have been aware. I'm sure he was in the Sephardic countries. He had to be aware. There were people. But it could be either he didn't have a teacher of it, whatever, or it was not his kav. Like the Alter Rebbe didn't want to see the Rabbarat didn't bring the Alter Rebbe to the Moshe. That was not his belong to the market. People belong different types of areas. It's not all different. There's Svarim about this. There's a lot talked about this.
So I am curious.
There are people talking. There's a whole arichas about the Rambam and Kav.
In the Tanya, where the
The one place that Rav Shover brings from the Rambam, I think in Hilchos Batzaitis, is Madam is a Kabbalistic concept. Some say the Rebbe, so some bring that as a proof, or some say not. There's a disagreement by Gedei Yisrael. It's not a.
why does the Alter Rebbe always say when he brings it variously, almost all the time, Stimulate Hachman HaKabbalah? As if he's not, and they agree with it.
That's one of the proofs that he's not. Exactly. Even if he knew, but no one said he's a Makubal. The question is whether he knew Kabbalah. He definitely didn't write on Kabbalah. He didn't write anything on Kabbalah. The question is if he was aware of it while he was writing, because you might read a book in Mishnah Torah, you don't see Kabbalah. There's no reference to it. It doesn't even exist. You speak Ma'aser Merkava. Ma'aser Merkava is also in the Mishnah. That's not necessarily Ma'aser. So he definitely knew there was a Ma'aser Merkava, of course. I'm sure he knew something about it. You don't have a lot about it. Gemara Nevuchim is a little about the Merkava, but not from a Kabbalistic perspective. It doesn't look, listen, if you learn Rambam, all parts of Rambam, his letters, everything, you don't find anywhere that he makes reference to like having been taught Kabbalah, in the Kabbalah as we know it. Ramban is full of Kabbalah. The Asad, the Derech Hasad, the Derech Hasad. But that could be simply because the Rambam may have known Kabbalah, or maybe he never had a real teacher that he could rely on, so to speak. They could say that he was Makabal. Because at the end of the day, it was all about Ish Mapish. No one came, there was no such thing as just learning on your own. You don't figure it out on your own. He received it. Maybe he didn't have that. I don't know. Maybe he could explain it in many ways. That's not surprising. Look, in Shas, you see Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was the Baal Mar Primus Atera. You don't hear Rabbi Akiva. I mean, we know that they knew Primus and Rabbi Akiva actually, yes, but there were others you're not going to find necessarily. Or they say Agadata has all the Primus Atera in it. But it's all concealed, But there was a reason. Look, the fact is, Kabbalah was not mass taught. It was Yechidim. Anyway, so let's go back.
That in his time, the Kabbalah was very big,
I sit in my chair.
and he was hiding.
You can make a cool if you want, but you can make a somersault.
This is unbelievable.
Some people think that Rambam was hiding it because the
I can think about 20 of these thoughts for.
Yeah. I told you, it's not a
You always want to be quiet down.
I can show you 11 Camus.
Yesterday's Haftarah. Yesterday's Haftarah already.
You know,
Jackson. Anyway, let's go back to.
Okay.
I don't want to go off on a tangent too much on that. I just want to go back to say one fundamental thing because it is relevant. There's no question that Siddur, especially Siddur Chabad, especially the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe, all the way, definitely chose the most complicated path, which is trying to bring it all together in a balanced way. I'll just give you examples. For example, Jacob Frank. You've heard of the Frankists, right? The Frankists. Shab said Tzvi in a different form. One of the big reasons that there was so much suspicion of Chassidim and distrust and fear, because they were just in the wake of Frank and Shab said Tzvi, caused major damage in Europe and Jewish belief. What did Frank say? These are people who took Kabbalah. This also explains why Kabbalah was taught very carefully, and how much damage can be done if it's not appreciated. According to Kabbalah, they took Kabbalah that says the deepest sparks in the darkest places. Okay, so let's go into the darkest places. And literally, Frank had orgies. Talking about real orgies. In the worst possible way. All in the name of elevating the sparks. And frankly, I don't think it was because of elevating sparks. No pun intended. It wasn't because of elevating sparks. They had good types, but they justified it. So what's the problem with that? Let's say even the biggest tzaddik. Why can't he go into the darkest places? In Arizal it says, one of the mistakes Adam made when he ate from the tree of knowledge was a Kabbalah mistake. He thought that because God said you could go there and you could still elevate it. He couldn't. The biggest tzaddik is not Echtem Ashur, is unacceptable, nobody, not Moshe Rabbeinu, no one. No one's allowed to go to a place willingly that is dark and say the deepest sparks are there. It's unacceptable. God put it there, Ashur B'dech, it's trapped there. After the fact, that's the power of tshuva, he speaks in time. After the fact, it's a whole different story. After the fact doesn't mean a person intentionally went there. Yeah, but that's a big difference, because you could say, one second, if after the fact I can elevate it, so what's the big thing? I'll go before. Now, that's the difference between life and death. That's a major difference. That would be like someone being over on Yisurim Daraisa because of that. That's unacceptable. Even with Lishma. And even if you could find a concept of Lishma, I'm not saying you could. You probably can't, because God says it's not allowed. There's no Lishma there. It's just not acceptable, period. No one. That's why, what do you think it says in Moshe? Even Moshe Rabbeinu, the highest of all high, he cannot break a mitzvah in the Torah. He becomes a Navi, he becomes Chayav Nisi, if he changes something that God said.
Bnei Aaron from yesterday's part.
Bnei Aaron didn't do any issue, by the way. The issue was said afterwards. Okay, but they went overboard with their spiritual ecstasy. Yes, and before they went into the pirates. We're not even talking about a sin. That's also the same point. Same thing with Noach, and I mean, all the point I'm trying to make is, so that's why this is a critical element in the picture. And when people talk about these things, that's why even today, some of the critique about Mashiach and other things in the street, most of it is based on nothing basis. But there are people who are smart, and they do hear things that are very similar to these type of Frankist arguments, and that's very dangerous. Even though the people saying it don't know what they're talking about. Right. Be very careful when it comes. When the Rebbe sent people out to the world to go to the darkest places to bring Yiddishkeit, this was not a license to do whatever you like. On the contrary, you have to be even more careful. But it can appear to someone, the Rebbe, send it. So we know the Rebbe gives the kayach. I'm not talking about Kabbalah sel. There's a Kabbalah. The Rebbe was very, very clear that the whole point of shlichus is as long as you're a shliach, not if you start doing whatever you want to do. Then you're not protected because you're not shluchah shalom kamesim. Moyel b'shlichusei, for example. But then there's the other side of things. So you could say, okay, you know what? Because of all this danger, let's altogether not deal with this world. That's what I'll talk about. The other extreme. The other extreme is asceticism, like the Meraglim. Why do we have to go into a Elam Hazeh, let's stay in the desert, surrounded by this? We'll go to Ruchnius, Prussian. Asceticism, total asceticism. We know that's also not Yiddishkeit. And the Baal Shem Tov was Shail, all his approach of Sigufin and tiniest, of punishing yourself, self-affliction and self, all the even though you'll find some Yechidis, good individuals that did it, but it was never a mainstream path. And it's not acceptable. ultimately. Because God doesn't want you to destroy the universe. He wants you to repair the universe. So someone say that the universe is filled with so much garbage. So either, how could I repair it without being consumed by it? That's the thin line. That's the hardest. That's the whole point. I believe this is the key to Ayin Beis. I said it in my introduction to Ayin Beis. I think Ayin Beis was written as said 1912, began the beginning of the 20th century, and the Rebbe Rashab, as a real visionary, anticipated that Elam Hazeh would become very powerful in this century and the next, and now. And now we need to see this more than ever, because now we're immersed in the world. 500 years ago, the world for Jews was a place of evil. We never knew where the next pogrom was coming from. Everything was dark. The pagan, the Goyish world were animals, treated us like that. And therefore, we were in a sense, and we built our strong, insulated world. Now, with enlightenment and all that, we are now part of the world. There's no longer this wall. So that's why you have the break of the two opinions. The reform movement, you say the more left decided, a Jew at home, a guy in the streets, with all the compromises. Assimilation, essentially. You have the other extreme, ultra-orthodoxy, which runs behind closed walls and says everything is to be afraid of the devil, and technology, and so on. And Chassidus is the only ultimate third path, which is the interface. How do you engage in the world without destroying it, and how to elevate it? And that's the key. That's where all this, what we're talking about, the tzimtzum. There's a real tzimtzum, there's real kalim, there's real gamui. We need to engage the containers of this world. Simple as that. We cannot deny that. But we must always remember that we're connected to something higher. And you have to always keep that balance. That's the dance.
The razor's in.
It is very much so.
Like a bungee jumper that is connected with the street.
So look, not everybody necessarily knows the philosophy behind it, but there's a strong philosophy behind it. It's a very strong. The key thing is to remember is that obviously God is everywhere. Correct. But that doesn't mean you can go everywhere. Big difference. God is everywhere.
We're not God.
Right, exactly. God is everything. Everything is not God. It's exactly right. And that's the key to understand. Because if you have pantheism, where God is nature, nature is God, then there's no yesh ma'ayin, there's no distance. So we're God. So whatever we do is godly. The other extreme, that God is beyond and has nothing to do with existence. So then again, you have the disconnect. That's like Tzimtzum Kipshute in a way. That the only way to connect is by annihilating. Tzimtzum Kipshute essentially says, you cannot take a material object and turn it into holiness. You have to deny it. By denying it, you connect to God. In other words, it's basically the ultra-orthodox right wing, the ultra-liberal left wing, come from rooted in the same philosophical flaw. The divine and existence can't coexist.
Can't have an interface.
Correct. One escapes into divine, like the Meraglim. The others, like Kairach, escape into the earth. And that's why he's swallowed by the earth. Eretz Eichel Sishva. Because that's what he said. He said, there's no kulukization. Well, we don't need any hierarchy. There's no holy. No, everybody's holy. Everything is God.
Right, that's all.
Because the Talish Akulit Chelos, that idea. This is a difficult balance.
So he was a pantheism?
Look, no. Kerach, I wouldn't say that. No. Kerach said no. Prachtenim is the kavon. The Rebbe stichas in Kerach, kuf reish ches. The mistake with the kuf, the reish ches, the regal hasmel, not a hay. Either going too much down, or there's no regal smiley, or there's connected. Kerach was a holy man. Helik Kazeh, the Kerach, the Pikach. But it was still a fundamental philosophy. And also, Kerach was talking also about it. That's what it says, Sheresh HaKuras. Because he saw the Sheresh HaKelim. The problem is, Sheresh HaKelim can't be revealed until you have Be'er. This all fits in. Everything you learn fits into this. Now, it's to say that the Yesh is so high, and start worshipping it and forgetting that there's Eir, is a fatal flaw. Then you're going to be stuck there. You can't get out. On the other hand, to say that it's only Eir, and there's no Kelim, where you avoid the Kelim or whatever, then you're not dealing with the Kavod. God wants us in this. Now God chose this paradox. Let's be honest, right? The God created day one. It says Yom Echad. Why does it say Yom Echad, not Yom Rishon? Because it said Achdus prevailed. Like Lifnei Tzimtzum, Achdus. So why God create day two? Why does he have to create potential problems? Potential. Let's say not real potential. Why does he have to separate? Why does he have to separate Adam and Chava? Our relationships would be very simple if we never separated. Right? The two entities that contend with the spouse. So with just one, You just turn to your back or your front or whatever and say, what do you want to do today, honey? And it'd be all one, and dragging and screeching, right? So simple. How much therapy would be saved? Relationship issues. If we were just all
Well,
one.
we would have a job crisis.
Yeah, we'd have maybe a different problem. Maybe we have a conflict then, you have a split personality. But we have that anyway. So, I'm saying, so whenever you talk about the Nesira, the Miyot Halavana, Shvira Sakela, the Tzimtzum, so you could always ask the question, why did God make so much trouble? Had he not done any of this, we wouldn't have all our problems. Right? Take away any of these splits. Yeah, even more. Take a Gemara. Here's a Gemara. You know this Gemara. It's one of the strangest Gemaras. And the only answers I've ever found is what we're discussing. Moshe says to Hashem, why does it say in the Torah, Nasa Adam, it's Hameni Kudmuseni? Why do you say Nasa? We. I mean, you're giving people food to argue there's a we, there's a plurality, duality. So you know what Hashem answers? Whoever wants to make a mistake will make a mistake. What kind of answer is that? Implanted a message that is opposite of others in order to people, because that's the purpose of creation. Who wants to make a mistake makes a mistake. That's the point. God wanted a world where you can make a mistake and don't make a mistake.
That's the fact that he's hiding.
That's the whole, listen, this is the whole purpose.
But Nasa is weak.
He wants the Sabbath Dira B'Tachtenim and whatever there's no reason given for it, that's what he wants. And that is let's put it this way, God is the ultimate gambler. Took the greatest risk. He took the greatest risk. Because he really gave free will.
But he knew the outcome anyway.
You know it's wrong.
Well, he's above time.
But when you say,
You see, that part I never liked because I don't think you understand what you're saying.
But you cannot say it.
You can't bring Ner Alil B'nei Adam before you understand the whole picture. It's not the basic of Ner Alil B'nei Adam. Because if you say that, you might as well dismiss the Holocaust as nothing happened. I mean, the outcome was 1.5 million innocent children died. It's not a joke.
and adults.
And what do you do with all that? With the God had a whole outcome. So it's not so simple.
Very, very strong.
Yeah, that ultimately will be a good end. Yeah, but you know, these things matter. You can't say they don't matter. They have to matter. I don't know if I ever told this to you. I found in this Mendel's book called Chabad. It was the philosophy of Chabad. So I asked him about it. The Rebbe's secretary. He wrote that as a thesis in university. Those days, the Rebbe looked a lot over, especially his stuff. The Rebbe had that whole book. It was tremendous tradition. The whole thing.
Philosophy of Chabad. A Chassidus.
Yeah.
You have that one? Yeah. I think that's it. Philosophy. Yeah.
So he says one thing there, then I'll continue here.
That's
You know, he says, no.
What's philosophy of Chabad?
Maybe put something there so it shouldn't move. So it's no filter. Say maybe put something on the floor. So he says something there. When I asked Dr. Mendel whether he wrote it, he said the Rebbe wrote that whole piece. I was sure that the Rebbe wrote it, but I wanted to confirm because I saw nobody could write that their own. He has there a piece, but asks a very, very big question. That if Mashiach is going to come anyways, at some point, so what difference does it make? A day later, a day earlier. So what do we achieve? In other words, you could say Mashiach came and Adam and Chava had not eaten from the tree of knowledge. It would have been then. So what's now different? It comes now. What's fundamentally different? It just took more time. Which really is the question is who needs our work?
Right.
We can go to sleep and do nothing. It'll happen anyway. And so always the answer is it'll be faster. Okay, fine, but then you could technically say so. It won't be fast. It's going to happen anyway. I'm sure it's going to happen. So it'll happen a day later. And he writes there an answer which, as I said, is pretty wild. He writes there that just as space has to be refined, so too time has to be refined. That there's any second that was not refined and remains a second and goes forever, that moment was never refined. So every second is not just later or earlier, actually part of existence would not have been refined. Even if Mashiach comes.
So
So every second more goes, that second remains forever an unredeemed second, so to speak. That's what he says. Which would mean, in other words, had Mashiach been brought a day before the Holocaust began, that would have been a major difference. So there is much dependent on our way. It's not just who cares a day later, a day earlier, no difference.
But don't we
On the
say,
other hand, it does say that as time passes, no, it does say because we'll
Gotta
be
redeem
it's
it.
deeper.
And the beer, and ultimately, don't we say that, like, as donos become real Averas, become like
Yeah, but
this,
it's
that
still not the
we
same.
will redeem, ultimately we will redeem the Holocaust.
Yeah, but no, well, it's hard to
No?
say that really completely.
Why not?
No, you will understand. Eich Hashem Kenafta be. You may understand.
Doesn't the Rebbe say he
No,
always
no,
Well,
wanted
according to this, it's clearly that the things that, since we did not refine, we left a certain seconds or moments and goals, they remain in a certain way, never fully redeemed. That doesn't mean there isn't another depth that we reach, because remember, it also says this, that the difference of when Mashiach would come of Adam and Chava time, it would have been like a flame that gathered all the sparks from a mile amount. Today we're on location, so to speak, it's spread all over the world. So many of us, so it's Momatal Mile. So definitely a far more qualitative transformation. But that doesn't mean that the hours or the years that we're going. That's why tzaddikim went Mesiras Nefesh to finish the goal. Why can't they just say it'll come? Who cares? Especially today, we're not living in under oppression. What other answer do you have? I mean, I'm just telling you what he's asking. And I asked Mendel, I asked him, where do you get this from? He said, the Rebbe wrote a whole piece in Hebrew to translate it. So that was interesting.
You really have to understand it.
Well, you have alternative explanation.
Well, the Rebbe did say that I think that he always wondered when the time he went to a Cater or something, that famous letter, that how will it be that the darkness and pain and suffering of Galus will be.
They will understand. No,
how it was worth it to die. I think it was.
First of all,
die.
Right.
To die.
Not only we understand, we'll say that.
I don't see a contradiction based on what I just said. The tzimtzum is never an end in itself. So any second you can finish the tzimtzum. Because according to that, then why not extend it to the end of the 6,000 years? And we'll have the deepest appreciation. That's the point. It's not a contradiction. Obviously, it says, Eich Hashem Kenavah, that will recognize how all that darkness led. But that still doesn't mean that you left a second Golus more. It's not optimal. But let's have it now, and we'll appreciate it, and tomorrow we'll appreciate it. We'll appreciate it today, we don't have to wait till tomorrow. Appreciation means after the fact again, not before the fact. That's the point. It's a subtle thing, obviously. Obviously, you can't say there won't be a full redemption. But you could say that there's a certain element. It's like, look, tshuva is always higher than a tzaddik, but you still want to have, it doesn't mean that you should keep doing averos and do tshuva. Do tshuva, and then from now on, bring light instead of darkness. Anyway, Kuf Nun Vav.
Watch the.
So to conclude the last chapter, so he said basically, here's the key.
In the example that you gave with the painter, did Tzimtzum happen before the example started?
What do you mean before the Atzilus is what happened before the example.
The whole example is after the Tzimtzum?
Oh, no, he does.
Atzilus. Atzilus yu b'chayuchad yu b'gamorachad. Beyond, that's where it becomes separate entities. Remember, Atzilus the Kolos also, so yes, it's also before the Tzimtzum. That way, before the Tzimtzum, I would say there's not even the instruments are not instruments. No kelim. In Atzilus you have kelim. Atzilus is a world, is an actual reality, not a physical reality, but it's a reality. In before the Tzimtzum, you basically everything is in the divine power. So the root of it is all the Lifnei Tzimtzum. There's the root of Iyu, Keicha Bigvul, first track, Keicha Gvul, second track. Then that Keicha Gvul has kelim. You go down to Eretz, like he says in Eretz itself, Iyu V'Gamoy is the air that goes inside the containers. And then he says the Yichud the Yichud there is that the air manifests in the Chetzenis of Kelim, that's what he says. So even as the containers, the instruments, like let's go back to the back of that example, when the artist is using the instrument now to paint, what's the dominating factor? No longer his vision. Now it's the paintbrush, because he wants a real colors on thing. So the paintbrush is, like I said, Megashim. It materializes is vision. So the vision was the air. The instrument is the actual container. The air inside the instrument is the vision as it's being impacted by the container, by the instruments, that are now putting it on canvas. So the kalim that are now putting it on canvas are united with the limited division that is diminished, and this so-called becomes more crass and more materialistic through the instrument. That's Iyur v'Gamoy Echad. That's how the vision of the art, of this piece of art, is connected with the Eir HaBlikvul. And this yichud that in this Eir Primi there should be a Gili Shalei B'Hagbola. I didn't explain that. I'll explain that now. So here we have so like this. Let's go back to the analogy I gave. Right? The analogy goes like this. There's the artist. There's his infinite possibilities. There's a vision of one particular piece of art. There's an instrument. This is how he started to how the vision and the instrument come together. That's the Eris and the kid. Clear? And then there's the art, of course, the product. The product is our existence. But we're talking about the process of how the product came into existence. So here's the key. The energy within the instrument is being affected by the instrument. So it's air, chitzenius air, that's impacted by the instrument, by the container. But it's still united. So there's a unity going on in that level. So in Atzilus, the container has a connection to the energy within it, which will give power once the product is created for us to retrace our steps to that unity. Clear? Then there's another unity. The energy that's inside the container connects to the energy that's beyond the container, to the vision, and all the way to the Eir HaBlikvul, and that gives the power of Eir Primi, the immanent energy that enters the containers and instruments, Shalei B'Hagbola, that they should have the ability to reach the infinite. So the finite possibility of this piece of art touches the infinite possibilities because it's connected. Because the air is connected to the Eir HaBlikvul. Does everybody get that? This is a critical component. This is critical in the interface. So there's a bunch of steps here. In other words, we don't just retrace from our product here, from this art to this world. We don't just trace the steps to Eir HaGvul, that we can discover God's instruments, Chesed of Atzilus, Gvur Atzilus. But because the air is connected to the Keli on the Chitzenius level, so the air leads us into the air that is previous air to the Etzema air.
You mean the two tracks? The two tracks are
They
both.
in other words, Garmui connects to Iyu, which is the Eris in the Keli.
Right.
And Iyu in Garmui connects to Chayu and to the Iyu of Iyu v'Chayu. I'm going to put it that way. That's the 4 steps. It's like 4 steps.
It cannot be done before.
According to the other interpretation, Iyu is Kei-Chagul. Okay, Kei-Chagul comes to the two tracks. Yeah, that's the steps. Yeah, that's very clear how it is. And I was going to explain how.
It's also creating
What do you mean by that?
I mean that is no label means it's no
Yeah, but it's 2 tracks. It's still 2 tracks. One is Gili, one is Hel. Yeah. I will add one more thing that he did say in the previous chapter, which was also, he spoke about Aveda. That Evdei Hashem and Nishmas and Evdei Hashem B'Gufam. Those that serve with the Neshama, it's like Iyu v'Chayu Echad. There's also a container there. But the whole point of the container is just to reveal the Ayah. And Evdei Hashem B'Gufam are those that transform their bodies. Like Eliyahu. That's Iyu v'Gamu Echad. He said the Ovis was Iyu v'Chayu Echad, I think. Right? Yeah. And they need to tell you it's connected also. So Ovis is Iyu, the Ovis are Iyu v'Chayu Echad, but they're Chayui. And Matan Torah added the Iyu, the Etzema there.
Yes, that's the model I'm learning right now. 2 types of tzaddikim. One is spiritual and shmini.
But this tzaddikim, he's explaining tzaddikim has to deal with Gashmi.
Right. Certainly. He said the one right. He said there's certain tzaddikim that are just the Iyu v'Chayehu, right? Which was Arizal. He brings down the Arizal, the Rashbi, and the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rabbi Gel said that some place the Rebbe he saw on a footnote where the Rebbe says, and all Kala Rebbeim. You heard about that? And all the Rebbeim. Yeah, that's it. The Rebbe was certainly the other one. The one that's the Shora Bar, dealing with the little Basha. But because the Basha is dealing with the physical world. The Rebbe's motto is change this world, change the bar with Garmel. The other one is Iyu V'Chayeu, is the ones that are doing Yehudim.
Radiated light.
Right? With an or.
Each one
And the other one is dealing transforming the kalim, which is Chayeu Garmel. He's dealing with Garmel.
I just realized
Maybe
something.
Garmel.
After I was writing there, and really
Has to
it
be
cannot
doing
be
both.
explained.
It has to be doing both.
And really it cannot be
That's
explained.
it's everything.
Means that he wasn't that level.
Anyway, so he says though that the others are the level of Yuva Chayuchad, but they only have the power to illuminate the world, not to transform it. And the transforming comes through Matan Teda, which means Etzem Aher.
Yeah, it doesn't transform time.
Listen, Tshuva transforms the past.
Ah.
Yeah, but that doesn't. But it doesn't.
It rewrites history, so to speak.
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Tshuva the Mafreya.
It's not ego. It's a real fire.
How do you explain you? I think he explained you is that Etzem Aher. I think you is Etzem Aher, and Chayu is the Mashta. That's my own stops with the Kalim.
But the ego is Slavish. The Chayei, not Kalim.
I'm Slavish as well. I'm Slavish. Yeah, they feeling. It's a reflection of the Tatzmas.
Yeah, ego is saying so.
Ain't said.
They keep saying it's Edo Sef Havliku, Keich Havliku. In the first time, Keich Havliku is a Gals Atzmos or something. Sachli Ma'edus, yeah. It could be the Etzem Aher, maybe the Etzem Aher, you may be the Etzem Aher. Not black and white, I have to read the lines again to see exactly.
You never says Tatzmas.
What's it?
No, it's either Keich Havliku, for sure Edo Sef Havliku, the question of that's Etzem Aher. It's Mashmitz Etzem Aher.
I don't know. What do you do the Orion Sof and Etzem? So you said both of them.
Sef is a general term. Etzem Aher is usually talking about a specific level. Sef just means divine light, infinite light. And Sef doesn't signify it. Yeah, everything's there in Sef. What I'm realizing now is that the transformation of the darkness, that may be Yuv Garmui. So Matan Teda goes into the Garmui, to Kalim, transforms the Yesh.
Yeah.
So that would be Matan Teda. So the Matzah of us will only be Yuv Chayuichat. They bring our Eris into the world, which is Gili. Transformation is Matan Teda, the Etzem Aher to the Mahapach Chesed. Yeah, that brings Etzem Aher. It's Mahapach, transformed. Didn't say in Gamui, didn't say it's Gamui.
So
I'm just thinking that maybe that's going
even if I use it, it's like Shakai. Limited, like the others.
So maybe. Well, at the end of chapter Kufr Dal clearly says that Iyu is the Eir Sef HaBlikul, the Keich HaBlikul, that's united with the Eir HaGvul. The Eiris, it says Eiris, which includes the Eir HaGvul. So it's Mashma Etzem Eir, but it doesn't say it clearly. In this chapter,
That's not how I'm understanding, because Eve and the Chayei is really like the same thing, basically.
it's not the same thing, for sure.
I was grappling with that because
No, it says it clearly. Explain what it is. Explain that Zichus what it is.
his bleak goal is united with his bleak goal.
It doesn't say that. We never say the exact opposite. Keich HaBlikul is the Keich of Cosmos, total Keich HaGil. That's united, it says.
That's united with what Chayei, which is
Eir HaGvul, he says.
adding one.
So what's the ego from Gomoyim?
Shelish or Shelish with Eir. Don't put that.
The Chayoy is the Eir.
Who says that?
So what is the Eir of Gomoyim?
Interpretations, either Keichakul or the Eir HaMislav.
Pashut becomes non-kosher. It's like Peshuta, or Peshuta becomes not kosher.
Yeah, it's a way to be, it's a way to manifest it.
Yeah, right. And then she goes to the Kenneth, and it's a shade. Or Peshuta, you, but then becomes
It's
a
from the perspective of the Kedi.
Yeah.
You could say, I see where the Kedi sees it.
Chayum is becomes.
I see where the Kedi sees it.
You have to keep it. It changes itself.
Okay.
The Ehu is not the shooter, and it's shooter. Not the shooter is.
And the Eir for sure says that's the whole thing. What's Eir v'chayu chad? Yichud is b'chinas teisvus Eir by Eir p'nimi shad ezeh Eir. Tud Eir p'nimi shlei matbala. That's the chidush. And Eir v'chayu chad. And even the Eir HaGvul should also, which is Eir p'nimi, which will ultimately go in the container, should also be united with the Eir.
That's okay.
Yeah, klar.
He's saying in the kids of the Eon, the Shem and Gamoy, who over
The Teicha Kelim. You're not reading the, you're just taking one line. Why don't you read what it says then afterwards?
The last line of the Kitzur, V'iyuk v'chiyui, hu
Let's read the
ilu
last
ba'ar
line.
shabba b'midah v'gvul, liyois bli agvala.
This sounds
Which one?
You wanted to hear about this whole chapter, the whole, okay, look, I can't go over the whole chapter. The whole chapter, you really want to understand, you're going to have to go over the chapter. The whole chapter of Eilis and the Kalim is the Kalim have Ashba on the Eir. Pnimis Eir, there's no Ashba of Eir on the Kalim. That's a difference. Chayui is the Eir that is Pnimis Eir. I'm saying, but it gives a whole difference. That's the difference in Evdi Hashem and Shmas and Evdi Hashem and Kufa. Pnimis Eir does not have an impact of the Keli. The Keli, so that's Chayui. The Eir that has an impact is Yuv Gamoy.
it is affected by the Kedi. It is affected by the
This
Kedi.
whole past chapter was the whole discussion just on this. Gave examples how the eye and the ears and the physical body, and the gash and the keches, they affect the faculties that they should be physical. So that's primarily the outer container and the outer energy. If you have a question, I'll be happy to answer. What's the question of the day? I spelled it out before, from all the levels.
Yes.
Use the example I gave.
I thought they did sound the whole time.
I gave you an example with the instrument. Go through the example and see if it works. All these levels are understood in the instrument. There's the instrument, there's energy within the instrument, there's energy that's beyond the instrument, and so on.
Yes, it's been.
No, okay. I'd just rather what the rabbis reacted to it. There's a thing called now, you know about 3D printing. I've been thinking about it the whole time. You'll see how it's connected exactly to what we're talking about. 3D printing, right? Everybody thought it's the next new thing, right? It's a huge thing. But now there's a thing called 4D printing. It just started at MIT. 4D printing is what's the fourth dimension? Time. And what it is that they're creating things, they're correcting, printing physical objects that have intelligence embedded in the physical object. And there, even when they're separate, they create themselves. For example, they create something that can have extrude five pieces of 5 instruments from this thing, and then it has magnetics based inside it and intelligence in each 5 of these pieces. And then over time, these magnets connect with each other, and without anybody touching it, the material itself creates into a intelligent, predetermined kind of useful vessel.
It's in an aura, though. Why is it?
So what I'm trying to say is
it's in an aura.
Well, that's what I was thinking the whole time is Ihu Vachamei when separate. These became separate instruments. They have in it Ihu some type of force, intelligence force, and then they can unite themselves, create themselves, and unite to it, form something. So is that what we're saying is that what we're seeing in the physical guy, we're seeing in actual world that we're living in past Mashiach.
So
That-
that's very
No, in a positive sense.
That's
But I'm just saying that we're seeing that the physicality, intelligence and physicality, it seems that's separate from the creator of the machine. The machine creates it; it's separate,
Right.
and now it has intelligence embedded in it,
Right.
which is in the ego of a gamehu had, so to
Right,
speak.
right.
And then it comes, and then it's becoming functional on its own,
Yeah,
separate from the
But it's
the
an
machine.
aura, a lower thing. It's not the fourth
Is
dimension.
that sort of what we're talking
It's an
about here?
aura of the first three
I
dimensions.
just wanted to know. where
And
I-
that new thing can
that's
create something
phenomenal.
else thereafter?
Yeah, it
sounds amazing.
it's a lower three connected to an upper three. That's all. It's not. It's not the
Oh,
fourth.
that's all. This is the most amazing
Yeah,
thing.
but it is amazing. But it's not the fourth dimension. It's an
fourth dimension is
aura
time.
of the
It's
first
the-
three.
the
It's an
dimension
aura.
of
It's an
light of the
aura.
fourth
It's
dimension
like going to
Is that
Bia.
it
It's like
it
Bia.
creates itself over time.
It's like Bia.
It's an amazing thing. The
How does it
intelligence-
relate to what we're discussing?
Because I'm thinking it seems
You
like
preface
that.
it.
It seems like this is one that fact. Once, even though it's separate, it still has intelligence in it. It never was. It has intelligence in it and became like sort of like the piece within the body. The ego, Kamehu, is in the body. You don't understand what I'm trying to get to. I know not. You got to think about it, but it's really amazing. I'm thinking about it the whole time.
We're getting closer to Mashiach, so you see everything.
This chair,
Always
they're making this is going to have intelligence embedded in the chair. All these physical world is going to, the physical inanimate world is going to have, it has intelligence in it.
Eventually, you'll
And
see
even though it's
that-
separate, it's already separate.
It's predetermined, not bechira.
You see what I'm saying? It's an amazing development.
Yeah, but
What's
it's amazing, but
what's
it's
the intelligence?
predetermined.
The intelligence that it has is that it can recreate something else?
Yeah, it can create itself or it can
No,
fix
no,
itself.
it
It can fix itself.
Coming closer to
It can
It can fix itself.
It can recreate something
they
else?
can create a chair now. If you break its leg and the leg is there, it will be able to fix itself.
That's not a bechira, though.
Fixes itself.
It's a little.
And it uses gravity, magnetism, electromagnetism. The natural forces in the world have forces. They have chips embedded in it that utilize those forces, those natural forces to
It's like in a self-repair. We get it. It'd be great to have a self-repairing car. It's not gonna be bechira.
So I'm just trying to think.
You guys want to learn or you want to?
Yeah, we'll go along.
Huh?
Yeah. What's cooking? Yeah.
None above.
Look, it's a very, this subject matter is complicated. Unless you could explain it to somebody else, you probably don't get it. So if you could, that would be a good sign. You could explain what it is. All the different levels of what he's talking about here. Can you?
I can't explain it to me, let alone.
Why don't you give us a test? We'll write it up and we'll
Final
grade the
exam.
papers.
Yeah.
And we'll know if we can give it back.
Count towards your
You
grade.
have to first learn the minor a few times. Because
Which one's
The whole minor.
Pinchas minor.
Starting from page 301. And 42.
Even that we talk so much like this, why don't you stop and start?
I have different